It is the Everton Byline. We are back for the 31st episode of this wonderful podcast. Great way to spend a Monday afternoon. Paddy, always chatting to you. How are you doing?
Yeah, good. An Everton free weekend and the first one for a while. So while I was very disappointed to see them lose and go out to the FA Cup against Bournemouth, the one upside for the journalist in me was that I was able to, relatively speaking, switch off for 3-ish days. So that was nice. Spent the weekend in Paris. Yeah, all good.
Yeah, there's a lot of people lamenting us being out the FA Cup, but it was one of them. Like, it wasn't like we played well against Bournemouth and we're kind of unlucky. Like, we just got beat by a much better side on the day. Like, I'm fine with it. So I wasn't sat there too much thinking like, oh, the draw's opened up for us. What could have been and all that. But yeah, just one of them. But there's still loads going on, as we'll be talking about over the course of this show. A lot of off the pitch stuff. So it's going to be a very off the pitchy sort of episode. As we move on. Just a reminder, as ever, we are sponsored by the Bridewell pub in town. You want to get down and have a nice pint while you're doing your shopping or you're out and about at the weekend. It is always a great place to stop in and go. If you watch us on YouTube, do hit like, do hit subscribe, do leave us a comment. Let us know your thoughts on anything we're talking about. And the same goes if you're listening as well on Apple or on Spotify. Please leave us a 5-star review. Or leave us a rating on Spotify as well. And Paddy, exciting developments. We've got an email. We have got our own email. So if you want to email us, which is very exciting, you can do so at evertonbyline@gmail.com. So if you've got anything you want to share with us, any thoughts, any feedback, anything like that, that you don't necessarily want to put on YouTube or on Spotify, you can email us. And me and Paddy will vet them. So yeah.
Any grievances?
Yeah. I mean, hopefully it'll be nicer than that. You know, I was going to say, it's like any free stuff. You know, we're not shy. We will take free stuff. You know, you were talking last week about potentially going to America in the summer. You know, have you got any great places you want to recommend to us or anything like that? We are open to ideas. So yeah, it's evertonbyline@gmail.com if you want to email us. Which is very exciting. Paddy, let's start then with the big news from over the last week or so. God, it feels ages ago since we played Brentford, doesn't it? But there's been loads of off-the-pitch stuff that's kind of come out in the days since. The main one is that, according to a variety of reports, not been officially confirmed by the club yet, Kevin Thelwell will not be staying at Everton beyond the course of his contract, which obviously expires at the end of this season. Based on what I've read, it seems like it's kind of a mutual thing. But it I suppose it brings some closure to something we've talked about for a while, and maybe on podcasts recently we've been sort of saying, you know, we need a resolution on this. Is he going to be here to oversee the transition into the new stadium and what is going to be a big summer? If he is going to be here, fine. If he's not, then we probably need to know sooner rather than later so they can get cracking on what's going to come. And it feels like, without actually being officially confirmed, it kind of has, and the cat's out the bag a little bit now.
Yeah, I mean, certainly there's nothing that I've heard to contradict any of those reports so far. So make of that what you will. I think we said a couple of weeks ago on the show where we actually looked in depth at Thelwell's record that probably you could read quite a bit into the decision not to give him a new deal up to this point. So obviously he's been out of contract for a while now, and while we've had clarity over Dyche's future, the Thelwell thing was allowed to rumble on. And I remember saying on that podcast, Matt, that I kind of felt like that told us quite a bit. The fact that they hadn't moved to secure his future. They hadn't almost immediately come in and said, all right, we back you. Here's a new deal. Just get on with it. Particularly with the situation as it is over the summer. So I always felt that this was the direction of travel. I'm a little bit surprised that it's almost taken this long for it to come out, to be honest. I mean, there's a couple of things here. The first is we wanted clarity, and I think we will get it fairly soon on that score. So that's a positive in that sense. The second and the big question here is now. Is it the right decision? And effectively, what's going to become of that role? Is somebody going to come in and replace him? I think somebody will come in, but not as a traditional sporting director, technical director, whatever you want to call them. And we'll, in essence, end up with something that looks a little bit different to what we've got now. I mean, I've always advocated for somebody of a director of football ilk, because I know how much there is to manage behind the scenes at football clubs, and I don't think a manager can do it all themselves. But I think Thelwell will look back on his legacy probably pretty fondly. In the 3 years he's been here, it's been a mad period, as we keep saying, a completely mad period when you look at points deductions and ownership uncertainty, and 3 successive relegation battles now, hopefully not 4, 3 relegation battles. Selling key players to try and balance the book, selling key players to try and keep the lights on, all that kind of stuff. And I think, as we said at the time, Matt, when we did the podcast, like, my sense on this is that if he was going to leave, then at least he could say, I did my bit in keeping Everton afloat. And the big question was whether he'd be able to push it on beyond that. Well, for all intents and purposes, he's not being given that opportunity, and that'll be up to somebody else. So, I mean, the one thing I would say here is that there's a fantastic opportunity for people at the club now. Whoever comes in a slightly different role to replace Thelwell, with a bit more of a blank canvas this summer to really shape this and push Everton on. I think that is an exciting possibility for someone.
I think it's really interesting because
it is.
There's been a lot of comparisons, I think, since this came out between Dyche and Thelwell, and how they are maybe kind of viewed similarly in their respective roles as kind of being like a wartime manager or like a wartime director of football, if you get what I mean. Like you know when Dyche comes into adverse circumstance, for example, like and he did last season, that he is good at sort of galvanizing and rallying against that, and he used that and channeled that kind of us against the world energy quite well last season. Obviously, this season it faded away, and Fell was kind of put into the same box as the director of footballs. I think in the last week or so, where it's been one of them where people have said, well, he's done a good job in tough circumstances, but maybe as someone who could push us on a little bit further, I don't really know. And I don't know, like I think when we spoke about Kevin Thelwell, I've maybe been a little bit more critical of him than maybe yourself. But I do sort of feel like that portrayal is a little bit harsh, because I think we've seen enough from Dyche in his years as a Premier League manager, being at Everton and Burnley, that he's obviously not the fella who could do the next bit of the job on the journey that we all kind of want to go on. But I just don't know with Thelwell, really. Like, I don't think we know enough about him as a director of football, certainly not his time at Everton. And going back to something you said there in regards to the director of football situation, I'm very much in the same camp. I think in the modern game, it's something that's close to being a necessity, really. Not necessarily having a director of football, but somebody in that position who oversees transfers, academy, who does the directing of football without necessarily maybe being called that, if you get what I mean. I think that is really important. But I also look back at Everton's deployment of it, if you want to use that word. And we first got one in, didn't we? It was Koeman and Walsh. That was the first. Steve Walsh was Everton's first director of football, wasn't he? I think I'm right in saying that.
Yeah.
So that was 3 summers. That was 3 summers after we lost Moyes as manager to Manchester United. So that would have been 2000. I might be getting it wrong. Yeah, it might be 2000, maybe 2016. It would have been, wouldn't it? Yeah, that was when Koeman and Walsh sort of were united, and there's like this new vision for Everton. And I think as we're sort of approaching 9 years of Everton having that model, in inverted commas, it feels like it's never been done properly, or never been or the club's never been in a situation where it's been allowed to be done properly. You think back to Koeman and Walsh, and even at that point, it was like, well, he's a Ronald Koeman signing, he's a Steve Walsh signing, he's a board signing. The epitome of that was the 3 number 10s, wasn't it? That summer where effectively like each part of the club bought a number 10 in each, and it was like, go and sort that. Then you had Marcel Brands in that situation where like he was weirdly on the board for a bit, and it felt like he was being undermined a little bit by Mashiri and his contacts and the players he wanted to bring in. Then we got managers who who didn't really fit that system as well. And then obviously with Kevin Thelwell, he's come in and the club's been cut off at the knees effectively by PSR to a point where he's not been able to in the last few years pay money up front for players. He's had to do bargain deals. He's lost players on Anthony Gordon on deadline day, Alex Iwobi on deadline day. So it feels like I imagine like the Freedkin group might look at this situation and go, this director of football idea, vision, has not necessarily worked for Everton. But I'd almost frame it differently in the sense that I don't think we've ever really given it the proper conditions from which it can maybe work and flourish. And every time we try to do it, for one reason or another, it's just been bastardized into something that's completely different to what the traditional director of football model should be. So I'm really interested to see where they go next with it, if you get what I mean, because I don't necessarily think it's that model that's been the issue. I think it's been everything around that's been the issue since we've tried to do it.
Yeah, I would agree with almost all of that. The only other thing to add here, of course, is that in a really bizarre way, Everton's financial issues over the last 2, 3, 4 years created conditions where actually within the structure, Thelwell had less interference and quite a lot of autonomy, certainly compared to Marcel Brands and Steve Walsh. I mean, I've written before that in a sense this kind of feels like his club now in terms of football structures, and I'm not just referring to the manager there, because actually that's probably not the best example here. That was a Freedkin group hire in Moyes, but just about everything else, even the promotion of Leighton Baines through the ranks, that's a Kevin Thelwell thing. The promotion of Dan Purdy as head of recruitment, James Vaughan's return to the club, initially as loans manager and now as kind of head of pathways, if you want to call it that. Gareth Prosser as the academy director. These are all Kevin Thelwell appointments, and he's revamped a lot of stuff that people maybe don't see so much behind the scenes. Within those very narrow confines, I think in the main, they got the players they wanted, or they were able to pick the players within those confines that they wanted. I mean, would they have gone for Beto if they'd had 30, 40 million pounds to spend on a striker and didn't have the need to do the kind of deferred payment plan? I mean, almost certainly not. But in other areas, Iliman Ndiaye, a long-time target, Jake O'Brien, a long-time target, signed, famously pursued Willie Gnonto over many windows, but didn't quite get the cash together for that. I would argue that recruitment looks all right now. And I mean, I'm still of the belief that Thelwell did a good job in very challenging, very difficult circumstances. Whether or not that gives you enough to say, as the Freedkin group, yeah, let's do this again. I mean, that they've clearly made the decision that it's not enough. But I think you kind of need to settle on what do Everton want to be, and is Thelwell the right man for being part of that? There's a different manager in situ now, one who we know likes to take a lot of onus in a recruitment sense himself. We'll go on to talk about the CEO situation, but a CEO who's playing quite a hands-on role at Leeds in the Championship. So again, that changes the dynamic somewhat. And I think where this is fascinating, to be honest, Matt, is in that the Moyes thing felt like instinctive. It was a reaction to something else that happened with Dyche going. And it was almost like, right, this is the right man for the job right now, even though we weren't necessarily planning for things to transpire the way they were, because we know they wanted to stick with Dyche initially. This is the first bit where you look at the TFG's paw prints are all over what's going to happen now. And it gives us a really interesting sense of where the club is going. I know there'll be a difference of opinion in the comments, and loads of people, I'm sure, will be split when it comes to the director of football. I'm not saying that I think you need somebody titled director of football. What I'm saying is, I see how many people work behind the scenes at Finch Farm, and somebody needs to manage them. And it can't be David Moyes, because David Moyes has got to look after Beto and Dominic Calvert-Lewin and the rest of the Everton squad at large. So, I mean, let's see where this leads us. I think it leads us into slightly different and slightly new territory. And I'm sure we'll hear more about those changes relatively soon. It's all fascinating. And like it feels like the start of the next chapter now. Almost like the belated start of the next chapter now for Everton.
Yeah, I am glad there's like some sort of like I said, it's not been officially confirmed yet, but it feels like there's clarity on this now. And like I think it frames Moyes' comments over the past few weeks quite interestingly as well, in the sense he's been talking about the summer and how much work there is to do. Yeah. And I think ultimately, like I think we said this when Moyes was appointed, when you've ultimately got a manager there who's on a 2.5-year deal and a director of football who's got 6 months left to run on his, the power is very much in the hands of David Moyes in that situation, isn't it? And if he's relaying to the owners I'm not sure about Kevin Thelwell, but I'm not sure about this particular model or this way of recruiting players, then ultimately they're gonna side of him, aren't they? Because he's the one who they've kind of come in and banked on themselves. So
they hired David Moyes, they didn't hire Kevin Thelwell.
Yeah,
that's the key difference, isn't it?
Yeah. I think I think Moyes' comments about directors of football, people probably have seen them in the past, about how he's maybe not necessarily wanted to work with one, but I think for me, what we've seen from him so far since he come back, Paddy, I think it's quite clear this is a very, very, very different fella to the one that came to the football club all those years ago. He is clearly mellowed, he's clearly matured. He sort of carries the aura of somebody who's just got a lot more know-how and experience about them. And I think he will know as well, like just by virtue of being 20 years older, like from when he first came in, like and having the energy to, when you're in your 60s, to run all aspects of the football club in what is a much more intense and complicated environment than 2 decades ago when he came in. Like he will surely be aware of that as well. So I don't think it's going to be a case necessarily of Moyes saying, I don't want to work with a director of football at all. I'm going to be the person who is completely in charge of everything. But it does feel like there's going to be a bit of fine tuning there in regards to, who actually has the final say on transfers or who's driving things. And I think that's going to be really interesting. And I think it's probably important.
I think it'll be spread out. Yeah. In terms of accountability, will be with maybe 3 or 4 people: CEO, David Moyes, head of recruitment, rather than a sporting director as such. And look, maybe that's not a bad idea. We'll see. I don't mind the manager. I think the manager has to have input on transfers because they're the ones that are playing the players. They're picking them. I don't think they should have all the input, because what happens if David Moyes leaves and hypothetically Thomas Frank or Carlos Corberán come in? I mean, let's use Corberán as an example. Different kind of manager, and probably would want different players. So I think that's where that one falls down. But I mean, fascinating period, really fascinating period. And I don't think it'll be Moyes running the ship. I think it'll be Moyes plus CEO plus others, and it takes us into new territory.
Yeah, and just finally on this, it almost feels like it might be kind of a good time for Thelwell to move on as well, like from his point of view, because, like we said, I think it's important to stress he's not been sacked here. They're just not going to renew his contract, which is obviously very different to what happened with Dyche. And I suppose he can. I think he's already started doing this to an extent. I remember he did a piece with the Independent, didn't he? And he obviously did that interview with the club a few weeks ago, where he's starting to sort of lay the foundations for probably what he knew at the time was going to be his exit, and talking about the difficult situations he's been in and how he's done a lot of good work behind the scenes that hasn't necessarily been spotted or talked about a lot. And he can potentially go on to other situations now in other clubs and point back at Everton and say, well, look at all this difficulty he had to work with. I saw out my full contract with the club is still in the Premier League. Look, he might even be able to say, hopefully, look at how well they're doing now based on the foundation that I was able to provide and the stability I was able to provide in that time frame. So it kind of feels like this could work out quite well for him as well.
Potentially, yes. I mean, there's no doubt disappointment probably his end and not getting a chance to take the project on after, let's say, laying the foundations. But if you do end up in a situation where a new CEO and a new manager have more input, then already your own influence is limited, and all of a sudden then it's not, well, I was the one tasked with signing Gilliman and Dye or Jake O'Brien. It becomes something very different. It's easy then in that network, I think, for a director of football to get a little bit lost. So, I mean, it's out there now. What are we? Start of March. It's out there now. Contract expires at the end of the season. And there will be clubs, I know for a fact there are clubs in the Premier League and further afield who are looking for a director of football. So that there may well be a decent market for him come this summer. I mean, I can only reflect what I hear from contacts inside the club and contacts outside the club. I mean, one of the things I did for my Thelwell read a few weeks ago was sense check with people in the industry. What do you think about him? Kind of canvassing opinions, and a lot of what came back was pretty positive on the whole. I mean, I think there is an understanding that Everton's been a very difficult place, a very challenging place to work. I think a lot of people, while they would look at some deals, Mopay and a few others, and be critical, I think a lot of people say a decent job in tough circumstances. So I don't think he comes away from this with his reputation diminished. I mean, maybe it's enhanced to an extent. And I wouldn't be too surprised if he jumps into an equivalent role somewhere else in the Premier League. I mean, does he want to go back to Europe or to MLS? He was in MLS before Everton. Does he want to try something like that again? Seeing where he goes, I think, will also be fascinating. It'll almost tell us a bit about just how much courage those people in the industry have in some of what they're saying there. So yeah, maybe it's the right time for everyone. Maybe it's the right time for everyone for something new. When the Freedkins came in, we said that very early with regime change, you get a sense of the shifting sands. Like the easiest ways to enact change are, if we're being honest, the football clubs, change the management structure and do something different on the football side. And within the space of 3-4 months, whether it was planned or not, we're kind of going to end up with all of those things. I would argue. So they're putting their pillars in place, and that means that this is the freaking grip ship now, and we've all jumped aboard.
Yeah, just finally on this, you talk about sense checking there, and just to give people like an insight into the journalistic side of this, and saying when you do that, like the feedback was pretty much almost entirely positive. Is that like the common thing when you do that, when you're asking for opinions on a director of football, a manager, a player? Like, do you have to be careful that people just want to say nice things about people who are in the industry as well? Or are there sometimes people you'll come back off the record and just say, I'm not saying this is Thelwell by any means, but people will come back and say, no, this person is an absolute chancer. I don't know how they've made it to this position.
I can't give you examples of the latter one, but it definitely happens an awful lot. I would actually skew the other way and say that football is one of those industries where everyone's kind of talking in the background.
Quite bitchy, like Mean Girls.
Yeah. If we want to do that, it'd be an interesting image for our listeners, for people watching on YouTube as well. Mean Girls type. Yeah, I tend to think that particularly those that work in football tend to have the idea it's competitive. Tend to have the idea that they're better than they could do a better job than the incumbent director of football at Everton. One of the challenges I had when we wrote about Thelwell arriving at Everton on a very basic level was that a lot of the feedback I was getting was, he's a really nice guy. And I ended up having to turn around to some of them, the people I was speaking to, and say, look, I cannot write a piece saying Everton's director of football is a nice guy, because ultimately it's important, but we need to go far beyond this. We need to assess him on the job he does and everything else. And maybe because of that nice guy image, people have been positive. But I think everyone looks at the job from the outside. Everyone knows what a basket case Everton's been. I still think if you look at the jobs others at Everton have had, even those that have been considered failures in the Mashiri era, Greta Steinson left Everton. and ended up at Tottenham and then at Leeds. Marcel Brands is now in a plum gig at PSV back in Holland. Look where the managers ended up in the main. Lampard initially back at Chelsea before he got sacked. Carlo, Roberto Martinez, all these guys almost seem to fall upwards. So the industry has a look at what's going on, sometimes disregards a little bit of what supporters say and a little bit of the supporter noise. But I think that sense checking is kind of vital, because we've all probably got our own personal inbuilt biases. I mean, I've given you one there off the top of my head. I like the director of football model in the main. I believe that there should be a director of football at Everton, or an equivalent type at Everton, as in most clubs. So it's constantly kind of asking that kind of stuff. And this is my perception of the job he's done. What do you think? Completely private. People can reply with what they want. And people are not normally shy in football circles to badmouth. But that wasn't the case here, really.
No, that's interesting. So like someone being talked up positively almost unanimously. The fact that that's sort of like the exception is quite interesting and says a lot, I suppose. But no, fascinating stuff. We'll move on, because we've got a couple of other topics we need to touch upon before we finish today. You sort of hinted at one of them there in regards to the CEO, which I think we said was, alongside the director of football, the big thing that Freedkins need to sort.
Yeah,
and it looks as though they're sort of getting close to doing that as well. Angus Kinnear is the name. He's been at Leeds United for a while now. You mentioned there he's had sort of quite a hands-on approach when he's been there, but I think sort of going back further in his career as well, Paddy, I think what it's been interesting to see is that he was at Arsenal when they sort of went through their stadium move as well, which is obviously potentially very relevant to us. But again, it's not been officially confirmed yet in the situation to Thelwell going, but it feels like he's very much the front runner to step in and take over that. And it seems like he will tick some boxes without being potentially a unanimously popular appointment.
Yeah, I mean, if you listen to what Leeds fans say about him, then I'd say the feedback is mixed. You'd probably, going back to Thelwell, you'd probably get a similar situation with him, wouldn't you? With Everton fans. Feedback pretty mixed. Gets credit for some things, less credit for others. The interesting thing looking at Kinnear's record is, like, first and foremost, when you look back at his early record, it was in commercial and stadium moves, that those kind of territories. And over time, that role has morphed. So you point to the role at Arsenal, did a similar thing as managing director of West Ham, of course, helping them transition between Upton Park and the London Stadium. At Leeds, big drive on commercial revenues, which I think was pretty positive. If you look at his record there, helped bring Adidas in, and massively spike shirt sales, I believe. So there's a commercial element here that's much needed, really important. But he's been at Leeds since 2017, and even in that time, the role has evolved, because for a while he had Marcelo Bielsa and a sporting director in Victor Ora. Neither of those two are there, and I think Kinnear in that kind of intervening period has taken a little bit more of a hands-on approach on the football side. So again, I think that will appeal within the new Everton structure. You've got somebody there with experience handling stadium moves, able to tap into commercial opportunities, and has that commercial background, but has also done the football side relatively recently. Again, I don't think it can replace the director of football as a sole pillar. As and when he joins, he will need to bring people with him, or he will need to recruit, I would argue, as well as using the resources already at the club's disposal and kind of within the staff. The thing that we wrote when it emerged that he was a front runner a few weeks ago, we said that because of Leeds' championship position and their quest for promotion, the preference here was, certainly from the Leeds side, was for this not to happen before the summer. So it may well be that it's end of the season and he's the new CEO from then. So we've all got loads of time to wrap our heads around it, to research into him, Matt, as I'm sure you'll do, I'll do, everybody else in the media landscape will do. Pour over the fine print and look at certain things, like, for example, the loan clauses, which is one of the big ones that comes back when you speak to Leeds fans, that idea that he was in some way complicit in, let's say, for example, the deal that brought Jack Harrison to Everton on a free loan when Leeds got relegated, amongst other things. Leeds fans weren't happy about that. I mean, the interesting thing for me is that we've got quite a lot to research with this guy. If you go on YouTube and you type in Angus Kinnear interview, and you've got, I think it's like 3 or 4 interviews with the biggest Leeds YouTube channel, Square Ball.
Is that you? Are you hinting at him to get on here? Is he going to be our first ever guest on the Byline if he wants to come on?
I wasn't hinting at it, but yeah.
Listen, Angus,
if you want to do it.
If you're doing your research, mate, and you're trying to find out about Everton before you come on, before you come in at the end of the season, listen, there's a spot for you. You know, privileged position to be the first ever Byline guest, but I think we could open a door for the new Everton CEO. We fancy you coming on, but
the hot seat. But I think that's a big positive. That obviously engaging with fans. I think across the board, really, you have to kind of do that. And my understanding of the Freedkin group, and particularly Dan Freedkin right at the top, is you're not going to hear much, if anything, from him. The time at Roma, I think, never done an on the record interview, and when they've communicated, it's been in the form of official statements. We've obviously at Everton, we've got Mark Watts as the exec chair, and I know Brian Walker within the Freedkin group, the president of strategy. He plays quite a big role in Everton and is here pretty regularly. But actually, these guys are largely based in the US. So the need for a local presence, to communicate the messaging from the owners and to, I suppose, work on the ground is really important. So it feels like we're getting a lot closer to having some of the answers to those big burning questions that we posed almost a month ago. I wouldn't be too surprised if we start getting pretty significant news on all of that stuff that we've mentioned soon. And I do think it will be quite a period of change for the club, incomings, outgoings, and everything else. So definitely want to keep an eye on. It will keep us busy, that's for sure, whilst we're kind of coming to terms with what all this is. The big thing for me is, and the thing that I've signposted already that I'm really interested in, is new structure, what it means, where the balance of power lies. And if you're not having a director of football, how do you run all of this? That's what I'm interested in hearing. As of now, as of recording, we don't have all the answers, but hopefully when the time is right, we will hear them.
It's just got to be ready for me for day one of that summer. Like, I know people say this every single season, like day one of the transfer window, we've got to be ready to go with this and this. But there is so much to do. Like, I think I read today, there's potentially 15 players that could leave or not have their loans renewed or be out of contract at the end of the year.
I've got 14, if you include Alcaraz from the original list of 13.
Okay.
And that includes
people such a huge amount of work. It's like, you know,
it needs to happen now, doesn't it?
Look at the situation. Now we're like Idrissa Gueye, like key player, like massive key player, and you know, you'd hope. I imagine they are trying to sort an extension for him out, but like, clubs can talk to him right now about leaving Everton and going abroad, and you know, the club necessarily wouldn't be aware of it. So
remember, they could have done in January, and they could have done with a whole host of Everton players, including Calvert-Lewin and Decore. And think about how important those three were: Decore, Idrissa Gueye, and Calvert-Lewin within the Dyche setup, for example. As of January, clubs were free to negotiate pre-contract. Foreign clubs were free to negotiate pre-contract agreements with them. So, I mean, I would argue that the work on contracts and everything else, it can't even start over the summer. It has to be something that gets underway as soon as possible. Probably yesterday, if we're being honest.
I suppose like Thelwell's going to have to be part of that, isn't he? Because he's not going on gardening leave, is he, till the end of the season? I wouldn't imagine.
Not to my knowledge. I mean, there's a contract until the end of the season. What I would say, Matt, is that if let's say, for argument's sake, and again, completely hypothetical. Don't read anything into this. We're in early March now. Let's say this is all announced, and by the end of April, we know every single change that's coming at Everton. Kevin Thelwell can't make decisions on these things. That makes no sense. I'm not saying he's not able to. He's not a capable guy, but he's not part of the new regime. So
he could be working for a rival club in a few months, and like he's got it's like access to all this like data and information and stuff. You just sort of I suppose in that situation they would have to put him on gardening leave, wouldn't they? I don't know. It's a bit of a weird one that. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out. But yeah, loads going on off the pitch certainly. And that continues, Paddy, with potentially what's going on with Goodison Park, and maybe one we can dig into a little bit more in future episodes. But story came out on, I think it was Friday last week from your colleague at The Athletic, Megan Feringa. I noticed you've got your byline snuck on there now after a few days as well.
I was away in Paris, and my byline was meant to be on it in the first place. So in between touring the various sites, I did message somebody and say, "Well, hang on, where's my name on this?" It wasn't any. It was a mistake. It was a mistake.
Just let somebody else have their Everton moments of glory. You have to just edge in there, didn't you? But
no, it's like was it John Terry who was on the Chelsea photo? The Champions
there you go.
That's me. But the Everton equivalent of that, I guess.
Yeah. That'll be Anthony Gordon in a few weeks when Newcastle win the cup as well, and his Newcastle trophy potentially.
Don't remind me of the cup final.
But
but yeah, I mean the story's interesting. I'm sure a lot of people, whether they subscribe to The Athletic or not, will have seen something of what we've written, at least the very basic details. I think the thing to stress, and the thing that I was very keen to get through to our news team when they were writing the story, was that this is one of several options being explored.
We should probably clarify what this actually is, because I don't think we said. So potentially this is Goodison Park maybe being kept as an entity of some sort for Everton's women team beyond this season, isn't it?
It is, yeah. So the thing I wanted to stress internally at The Athletic, but also then through the writing, was that this is one of several options being considered. And I think the Freedkin group have made it very clear early doors that they consider the women's team to be a priority. They want to improve facilities. WSL at the moment is having a big drive towards improving facilities, increasing attendances, all that kind of stuff. And there may well come a time, people will know better than me, but there may well come a time when you'll have kind of a minimum capacity that you have to, a threshold that you have to meet to qualify for membership. So the importance of this for the women's team is quite clear. But what you've also got parallel to that, and I think why then we've started to have this discussion, is you've got the Goodison Legacy project, which was unveiled quite a while ago. But I think updates have kind of been conspicuous in their absence. I mean, you work for an outlet, Matt, that produces reams and reams of Everton content every single day. When was the last time an update came on the Everton Legacy project? We're talking probably years ago.
Years ago, yeah.
And that original plan, as I understood it, was going to be affordable housing and landscape gardens. It was going to be a mental health hub, a potential walk-in centre. I think the key detail there was that was I suppose, an ambition, a best-case scenario, and it needed to be funded. And I think what's happened, reading between the lines, is that Everton have not been in a position to plough resources into the Everton Legacy project because they've been straining to get by day in, day out. And any spare resource has had to go to wages, or it's had to go to signing a player to try and help keep them up. So we've kind of got through to this spell with a bit of tumbleweed. And then all of a sudden everyone, I suppose the Freedkin group, have come in and looked at this and gone, well, hang on, what's happening to Goodison and what's happening to the women's team? And like all these big Everton questions. And I think like one helps the other there. I mean, I spoke about needing to increase attendances and improve the women's team facilities. Goodison, as of end of the season, June the 1st, is no longer operational as a Premier League venue, as a men's first team venue. So I think that's why it's being discussed internally, and it's why it's an option. I don't think it is the only option. I don't think it's there yet. And again, those things need to be stressed. But certainly it's one of those things that's doing the rounds as a possibility. That's interesting. I mean, I'm like, so loads of comments on this.
Do you like it as an idea? Because when I first heard about it, I thought that sounds absolutely boss, and I was like fully on board. And like I love the idea of keeping Goodison in some form and having the women's team playing there. Like sort of like the more I thought about it, the more I thought like maybe they deserve their own new stadium. Maybe if we're going to give the women's team the best facilities in class, and like let's be honest, like there are WSL teams like Chelsea, Arsenal, Manchester City who are like standard bearers in that sense. Like, can Goodison provide the best facilities in the women's game anymore? Like, I don't know if it can. Like,
no.
Would Goodison have to be redeveloped from that sense? And then I suppose like there's the emotional side of it as well, then isn't it? From some aspects that I suppose we've been told all year, like this is Goodison's final, the last dance. I don't really like that phrase, but it is. And like when we all walk out of that ground against Southampton for the last time, like that's going to be it. So you've got the kind of emotional factor of like, what would it be like going back to Goodison that's like maybe not got the same attendances, maybe it's been scaled down. Obviously, we don't know what it would be like yet. So I think I'd still be on board with it, but like I would have big questions about it in terms of, is it enough for the women's team in a sense that if the Freedkin group wanted to be at the very cutting edge of women's football, and also the emotional aspects that get fed into it as well.
I think that's all really legitimate stuff, and that all of those things have probably gone through my head at various points. Just on a very basic level, Matt, I'm not great with the idea of like having this cut-off point at the end of the season and being like, right, goodbye to Goodison. And then all of a sudden then somebody goes, well, hang on, it might not be goodbye because you might be at a WSL fixture next season. I still think there's loads to resolve, to be honest, until we get there. There'll be loads of things that have to be ironed out before we can even get to a point where this is going to happen, and when we can start having kind of debates as to what capacity is going to be and all that kind of stuff. I still think there are lots of hurdles to overcome in that regard. I think the point you raised about facilities is a really good one, because surely the aim should be to be best in class. And it may well be that that's best done with a brand new facility. Maybe it's done by redeveloping Walton Hall Park. I suppose my issue with Walton Hall Park, first one, is that the club doesn't technically own the land in that stadium. It's in conjunction with the local county FA, I think it is, Liverpool County FA. The other is that you're in a park, and that park is protected, and I think there'll be pretty fierce objections to taking away some of that greenery for redevelopment. I can understand why, to be honest, given it's a green space in the city. And then you've got simple things like, well, how much would this cost to redevelop Walton Hall and everything else? So, I mean, it feels to me like it's a solution because people do the sums and think, well, Goodison's left empty, and we could use this as part of our legacy project. I'm not saying the legacy project is going to be scrapped, because I don't think it will be, but part of our legacy project, and it kind of snowballs from there. But it just, to me, it feels like we're a long way from being ready. The funny thing is, Matt, I mean, we've banged on and on and on about solutions with director of football and CEO, and time is of the essence. Same again on the legacy project. We're close to the end of the season right now. Well, we've got 5 home games left.
Yeah.
So kind of whatever is happening, whether it's women's team partly moving to Goodison or not, it needs to get going.
I think everyone at the club will be so grateful that Moyes has kind of pushed us away from relegation trouble, because imagine having all of this to deal with.
Oh yeah.
As well as being in the midst of a relegation battle and not knowing if you're going to be a Premier League club next season. Like that in itself would have been just too much to do. But like the last thing I say on like the Goodison Park women's team thing is I kind of love this being floated as an idea, because it feels like, I think we've spoken about this a bit, that during the bad machinery years when PSR was, sort of suffocating us as a football club, it did just get pushed to the side, didn't it? The women's team as an entity, it felt like nobody really cared about it. Obviously, they kind of bore the brunt for the financial issues elsewhere in the football club. And obviously the Freedkins group have come in, they've invested in players, with a lot of players in January. They seem to be moving in a better direction as a team. And I think like the fact that like this is even being floated and like they're being creative and bold about something like this is a really good sign for what the Freedkins group want to do with the women's team and sort of push it forward. So I like that they're being creative. I like that they're being bold, and that this is already kind of on the agenda already. So yeah, good from that perspective, and it's going to be intriguing to see what happens. We will wrap up, Paddy, as ever, with our number 31s. I think I said this last week. It's not a vintage class, this, by any means.
It's not.
The current incumbent is Big Asmir Begovic, who was obviously in the thick of that scrap. Brighton, have you got anyone else you want to bring up from this one? Probably the most interesting one for me is Ademola Lookman.
Yeah. Let's talk about Ademola Lookman, because
the worst penalty taker in the world, according to his current manager, but he's quite good at everything else currently with Atlanta.
That was remarkable, as a quote from Gasperini. And like when you think about how smart the guy is and how good a job he's done at Atalanta, to kind of alienate arguably your best player in such a way was quite a put down. I mean, it's taken Lookman an awfully long time between Everton and Atalanta to get where he is now. And I would argue, actually, even some of the spells closer to this point haven't been a big, resounding success. You think about his Fulham loan and his Leicester loan and everything else. He was good in fits and spurts, but did he set the world alight? No. But I think everybody knew, including Steve Walsh, another reference for him, the director of football who brought him to Everton, that if handled in the right way, and if there was the right balance of club helping him, development, right location, and also the player helping himself, that Lookman had real potential. And you're seeing that. Like, you're seeing his ability, driving, high speed, off both feet, committing players, increasingly doing it in big games as well. When you look back to his goals in the Europa League final last season, he's turned into a magnificent footballer. And just a shame that he's done this a long time after his Everton stint. I mean, one of the things for me is that he moved from London very young, and he'd never really known anything other than London. And I think he was quite isolated in Liverpool from everything I hear, and just didn't really settle. And Silva gave him chances, but was never convinced of the work rate and stuff. Very different period in Everton's history. I'll always remember Allardyce telling them to go to, I think it was Derby County on loan.
Yeah.
And Lookman basically just went, no, I'm off to Leipzig. See you later. Which, I mean, is a moment of insolence from a player to his manager, but like in a curious way, I quite respected it, because I like seeing players make those choices. I mean,
he's like
a shame, but a good player, very, very good player.
I think sometimes like it just doesn't work, does it? But I also think like I wonder if he would have been in this category anyway. But like I do think like players like him, and like I remember like Vlasic as well was around at the same time, wasn't he? Like when your club's just in a terrible situation and you're sacking managers and you're struggling, players like that who need time and need nuance in the coaching and patience, they just fall through the cracks, don't they? And like Allardyce let him go, and we brought in Walcott for 25 million. When really, if we were like a proper, well-functioning football club at that point, you've got a manager in who believes in like the young talent and is willing to persist with him between then and the end of the season, because you're not terrified of getting relegated. So yeah, a shame he went through. We are well over time today, so I'm just going to rattle through these. So we've got Begovic, Lonergan, João Virginia, added for a bit, Lookman, Matty Kennedy, that name for a while, Adam Forshaw, Conor McAlhaney, who was forever 21 years old, Seamus Coleman had it for a bit, and then Mark Hughes wore it for a bit. James Vaughan won it in 04-05 when he broke the record. Leon Osman had it twice between loan spells. Dean Delaney, who was a backup goalie apparently.
Yeah.
Terry Phelan and Thomas Mara was our first wearer of it in 97.
You know what I want, Matt? I'd even more than people sending emails to us reproaching some of your comments on this pod. I would love, a little bit like the one we got the other week. I'd like some stories on some of these. Like, I bumped into Matty Kennedy in Largo's in Liverpool City Centre.
Conor McAlady used to be out and about quite a lot in town. I remember seeing him around.
He used to run a juice bar for a while near me.
Yeah.
I think I'd always see him in, I don't know what it's called now, but it used to be called LA Fitness on Rose Lane.
If you bumped into any of those players around and about, let us know. If you met Dean Delaney in Walkabout in town, let us know. And, do tell us. It'd be great to get those stories. Number 32 is a better one next week. Some more interesting names in there.
It's great, actually. Just looking through now, I've got a list of all of them. 33 is quite fun as well. Not quite as fun as 32, but that was enjoyed that.
31's very backup goalkeeper-y number about going off that, but not a classic.
Goalkeeper and young players who, for one reason or another, didn't quite make the grade at Everton.
Young, promising wingers who fell through the cracks. There we go. This is probably our longest ever show. Thank you to everyone for listening. If you got to this point, we are sponsored by the Bridewell. If you watch us on YouTube, please leave a comment. Please hit like and subscribe. If you're listening, please do the same as well. Please leave us a 5-star review. Leave us a nice comment. Wolves at the ridiculous time at 8 o'clock on Saturday this weekend.
I didn't even moan about that, Matt, but I'll do it next Monday.
Yeah, that's what I'll save that for next week. Do let us. Do tune in for that to hear Paddy's travel diary moaning, and we'll reflect a bit on the game, obviously, and any other news as well. Up the top, speak to you again soon.